dive in, will we, Ger? We won't keep people waiting too long. We're going to talk about the recruitment process, and it's just more to give people an insight or what we believe, because it could be different in different companies, it can be different strategies that people are using, but it's how our perception of the process. Ger has worked a long time within the process, so he's a bit more of an idea as to how it works from his perspective, I suppose. Would that be right to say?
Yeah, I think that a lot of companies can do it in different ways. It depends, you could be the guy running the corner shop and your recruitment process could be very, very simple. It's all you. Or you could be working for a multinational company and there is a process and a procedure that has to be followed for a lot of different commercial and compliance reasons. So I think what we'll focus on today is kind of we'll aim more towards, steer more away from the guy in the corner shop and more towards a more corporate world. Not every company or organisation will do it in exactly the same way, but we'll have a look at the process and we'll maybe have a little bit of a look at the people involved.
Yeah, and that's it. And we have Ger was very good. I'm going to give him all the credit here. We did talk about it, but Ger created it. We have some little graphics for people as well. So if people don't want to listen to us, so there are some graphics, and I presume I suppose it's okay to make them available to people if they want them. Would that be okay from you?
Absolutely, yeah. We can put them up on the...
So don't worry if you miss out on things. We'll pop them up and then we'll pop them down because, you want to see our beautiful faces and not a big slide. So, yeah, we'll do that. And I suppose we'll dive straight in and bring up the first one, which is the process itself.
Okay, so look, we're very conscious of not turning jobtalkjava into an hour long of a PowerPoint presentation, but I suppose it's important for people to be able to visualize what we're actually talking about here today. Okay, so I'm going to just take you through this briefly as best I can. So I suppose the first thing about recruitment is there's a requirement for a job to be done. So what is a job? A job, well, it's a specific role within an organisation that involves performing tasks in exchange for compensation, typically in the form of wages or salaries. So that's a definition I lifted from somewhere. I think it might have been from the CIPD. So I suppose then from a person point of view, or a business point of view, well, how do you know that there is a need for that job to exist? Is there, perhaps you've a team of 3 people and somebody leaves, so now you've got a team of 2 people and you have a vacancy, so you've got a headcount available, what's called a headcount or a vacancy or a job available. You've got to make a decision then as to whether or not you are going to replace like for like. Has anything changed in the job that that person had done before they left, and do you need to redesign the job or rewrite the job spec? Very, very often what happens with job specs is that they're not amazingly well written and not amazingly well thought through. In my time, I've come across job specs for roles that I might be recruiting for today that were originally written about 10 years ago and had bits and bobs taken out and copied and pasted and put in and taken out, and that's not the way to go about doing it. You need to kind of sit back, in my opinion, and think about, well, what about it? What is this job meant to do? And how are we going to attract people? How are we going to create meaningful and fulfilling work? How are we going to compensate people for it? Sometimes you might come across a situation where, well, you still have your team of 3 people, but the work of that team has expanded. And then you're making a case to the business to increase your headcount. So you might want to move from a team of 3 to a team to a team of 4, and so you then have to think about, well, actually, again, the job design, the job spec, and the purpose of that job really, really, really important, and get all your data together to make sure that you can support going out to market to recruit for this role. I would suggest numbers and metrics are really, really important here. Think about the cost again of hiring. Think about the cost of not hiring. Is your business going to lose sales because this person hasn't been hired, for example? And if anybody does have any questions, just throw them into the chat there, and we can have a little bit of we can address them as best we can. Then you're going to move to, you've made a decision, you're going to recruit. Well, how are you going to do it? Are you going to go in-house? Are you going to, pull from the team in your in your organization and make the job available to those people? There might be people looking to be promoted, and you've created a compelling career path, and this is an opportunity for people to move up or across in the organization, develop themselves. Are you going to go outside the business? Very often what I see is that companies will make a decision, right, we're just going to stay in-house with this. When I worked with Guinness many years ago, what we did was we would open it up in-house for a little while first, and then every single role would be posted externally, and we'd make a decision from our candidate on who was coming forward to interview at that point. There's advertising. How are you going to post the role? How are you going to post the role internally? There's things to do kind of in the back of house. If you've got a HR system like Workday, for example, there are technical tweaks that you have to do to make sure that everything is accounted for. How are you going to make that job look attractive so that you are attracting a sufficient pool of qualified candidates to apply for that role? And then there are, internal or external considerations, and sometimes there's a bit of politics as well going on with that, that you might have to decide how are you going to deal with referrals, maybe from an important stakeholder in the business, for example. Are there people in your business who in your heart and soul aren't quite ready for this role, and maybe you might have to let them down? How are you going to deal with those conversations? Things to think about. Okay, then there's assessment. So this is where people like you and I come in some ways, Lorraine, that people have written their CVs, and then the CV or the application arrives into the business. Those applications are screened. The decision is made as to who's coming forward for interview or assessment. Somebody has to schedule the interviews, conduct the assessments, and make a decision. Now, the next point, and this is where some things can kind of get a little bit blurred. Okay, at the decision making, some businesses may go and reach out to the candidate straight away, to the successful candidate straight away, and make an offer. However, what you do need to do in many cases is to check references. You might need to conduct a medical. You might need to check somebody's academic credentials if they're really important for the role. People's right to work in a country is also important, or if they have any kind of restriction on working in that country. So you've got to check all of those things and make sure that the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, and then you're making the final decision. So very often what people will do is they'll say after job interview, and they'll ring somebody and they're going to make an offer, but they'll make an offer subject to the references, the medical, all of those final checks being completed properly. Okay, and then there is the actual offer. So who does it? Is it the hiring manager? Is it the recruiting person? Somebody from HR? Whoever it is. Okay, you've got to finalise the details of the contract. Sometimes there's negotiation around that. What is the final salary going to be? Any other business like perks and benefits, time off, holidays, medical will come into it perhaps, working from home, hybrid, in the office full time. All of those things, they all have to be kind of ironed out, and that has to be done before somebody sets foot in the business. And then the start date. So somebody has to be onboarded well. Inductions, who's going to conduct their induction, what's that going to look like? A good induction should go a long way towards addressing any concerns that the person might have. Ideally, at some stage, by the end of the first month, 6 weeks, they're introduced to the performance management system, and they're set up on that so that they know, they have a good idea of what their goals are and what they're working towards, what they mean, and how they can be successful.
Yeah, it's very clear to see that the process itself can be as long or as short as a company will need it to be. So, the bigger companies, like for example, certain companies might stay at a certain stage for longer, like the assessment stage, because for example, Google might have, I think they have like 8 interview stages or something. They have a lot of different types of assessments and things, and so that process takes time, and so it means that there has to be a lot of communication between obviously the candidates, but internally between those who are in charge of certain elements of that process, because not everyone is going to be, the higher up they go, different people are then in charge of or responsible for conducting certain things around it. So it's not just as easy as people may presume it to be, especially with the visa elements. You have to contact people externally for that, so it does take a lot of time depending on the circumstances, I think.
Yeah, and in my again, I know I refer to my time in Guinness a lot, but that's where I spent 20 years of my career. But just before COVID hit in 2020, I hired somebody from China, and they basically we had to jump through an awful lot of extra hoops because of there's different international arrangements with between the European Union and different territories around the world. So the guys from the guys from say Brazil, it was very clear what they could and couldn't do. There was different bits of red tape to go with the Chinese person, because the Chinese person actually, if I recall correctly, wasn't attending college and stuff like that. They were coming to Ireland to live and work full time and stuff like that. Now, I have to say they were by far and away, and I think we hired a batch of about 20 people. These were from facing customer service assistants, and the Chinese person was far and away the outstanding candidate in the pool. I couldn't not hire them, and of course, you've got to hire on merit and stuff like that, but it was difficult both internally with the within the organisation, and then there was certain European Union regulations that we had to come to. And I'll never forget one of the many things that I will regret about COVID, and I suppose in the grander scheme of things it's not a big thing, but the poor lady was only in the business a week, and we had to shut the business because of the nature of the business and COVID, and we were into lockdown. And I was like, after all of that work that I had gone through, different people in the organisation, and the lady had to provide different documents for us as well. I had to go chasing up on her side, and next thing we know, we're kind of making a phone call and saying, look, we have to kind of stay in a bit of a holding pattern here, for a little while. Now, in fairness, the company looked after everybody in that situation. They weren't suddenly just cut from the payroll immediately or anything like that. That the person was on a fixed term contract, but it was difficult.
No, that's the whole thing with regards to the information flow in a process, right? In that it could stall the process and slow it down, but it could lead to that communication breakdown, because if somebody at a certain stage of that process doesn't have any new information, then they won't naturally follow up with certain things like a status of your application, because they don't have anything new to tell you. They don't know if you're selected for interview. They don't know if you've been successful in an offer, because they may be doing checks, they may be doing this, that and the other. And I think effective communication is not sending in updates that have no new information. And I think everyone appreciates that as well, where they're not getting emails and messages saying, oh, it's not gone through, or it's not progressing, or whatever, So I think patience is important when you understand the process, but also you ask a question if you want information as well. If you're happy to get the feedback back, that there's no development. I'm not saying that it is the way it is. I'm saying it could happen that way, and I think just patience is also good in the process.
I think and again, to kind of recall our episode 2 weeks ago, that if I am a hiring manager and I've got a role in a department that I'm leading a team to do a specific job, so I worked in the retail team in the Guinness storehouse, and it's a busy business, and there are tasks to do every day. There's an existing team to lead. There's a lot going on in that business, And if I've gone out to recruit and and I'm relying on a support network behind me of recruiters and HR people, or occupational health for the medicals or anything like that, and they have no news for me, I'm not naturally going to go, I'm going to ring the candidate now just to tell them there's no news, just for the sake of keeping communication. Now maybe, you should find a way of kind of keeping them in the loop and keeping, I suppose what we used to call it was keeping the candidates warm, so that they don't kind of disappear off into the ether, because the last thing you want to do is lose a good candidate because you haven't communicated with them. But I suppose it's around being really, really clear about what the communication is going to be, and establishing the trust that there will be communication when we as a business are ready to communicate with you. So it's about striking that balance. Candidates need to understand where businesses are at and how businesses work, which is one of the in terms of recruitment, which is one of the reasons that we're here today. But also businesses need to understand, well, don't let the good talent go because your processes aren't what they should be.
Yeah, like I do think as well, if there is that, I suppose that initiative, I'm very much like this anyway, but I think it's kind of, if you are both ways, if you don't hear anything in, let's say, a week or thereabouts, as in if you're a recruiter and you're waiting on information to tell the candidate as to their status or whatever, and you feel, if I was the candidate, I would like a little, like, even just there's no update at the moment kind of message within a week or something, by all means please do that. If you feel yourself, like, take the initiative. I don't see why people can't take the initiative, because again, that, as you said, it keeps them warm. It means that oh great, that's fine, it alleviates some of that stress, no worries, I can keep doing what I'm doing, or I don't need to follow up because I'm not, and I don't feel like I'm being ignored, whatever it might be. But again, that's where the last episode was very much that communication breakdown happens, because somewhere along a process somebody isn't picking up something. Now, it doesn't always have to be on the employer side, is what I'm saying, or the recruiter side of the hiring. Normally the recruiter is the person in the middle, in Ireland anyway. I don't know, because again, job titles might be different elsewhere, but if it's a recruitment agent, then likely is they're waiting on the client themselves to tell them what's up, and then they can tell the candidate. So I think it's just a matter of understanding that they are doing their best as well for you, because they want you to get the job. So
it's about and what I would say, that relationship that the business has with the recruiter, particularly if they're using an external agency, is really, really important. You've got to make sure that you're kind of, as a business, a priority for them. Which, you would think, well, we're paying them money to go and recruit, or, get people to bring into the process. Sometimes if they're third-party recruiters, they might actually employ the people that you want to hire directly themselves, and then kind of send them on an agency basis to your business. Now, as the business where the role is originating, you should always have oversight of who is actually coming. Don't just rely on a third-party agency just to send you staff, because that will end in tears, I promise you. Please don't do that. But you've got to make sure that you've got really, really good relations with the recruiter, and you're establishing the lines of communication between yourself and that external recruiter, and the accountabilities, and who's responsible for what, who's following up when, because you can be guaranteed, people are busy. I might be busy as a hiring manager managing my shop at the Guinness Storehouse, but that recruiter, they're probably not only recruiting for your role, they're recruiting for a lot of other roles, and they're going to go where the action is, to be honest with you, so if you're not as representing the hiring company, if you're not on top of your game, you can't expect the recruiter acting on your behalf to be on top of their game either. You have to give them the tools to succeed.
Again, that's the whole thing. Like, again, this whole process, it's a mutual respect across the board. I think we will, I suppose, at the end of this, there's a few things that you as a candidate could do if you want to win, I suppose, in the process, or at least put yourself best in the process. But yeah, if you're not nurturing those relationships across the board, then something's going to break down and something's going to happen. And I think that leads to that episode of ghosting. Hey! But anyway, I think that's a nice segue though into the next thing that we were going to say or talk about today. So I'll add that on now. And basically this is another graph that Ger was very good in preparing, but it's what we perceive how the process works, we'll say. As you can see, they're all like interconnected. You may not have all these things in the process in your company. It just depends on who is in charge of, let's say, of the hiring process, right? It could be anyone. But yeah, like everyone is interconnected, as you can see, with a few other people outside. But yeah, it's a very interesting graph, I think.
Well, do you know, I put it together, so I think it's, you know, the finest thing on the internet today. But no, I suppose, look, at the heart of it all, what I wanted to do with this is to kind of just maybe go through the jobs that each of the individual people would do. So we spoke about the process a couple of minutes ago and what the actual kind of the technical things that need to happen or whatever else, and the considerations, like, you know. But I wanted to show people, typically in corporate companies, again, this is not necessarily the guy at the corner shop, like, you know, this is more kind of the people that you and I would deal with through our CV writing. This is the structure or the people that might be involved in their application. Sometimes you don't actually see these people or are aware that these people are in the process. And again, when we talk about ghosting and stuff like that, well, actually, do you know what? The reason that you might perceive yourself to be ghosted is that your application, depending upon where you're at, could be sitting with any one of these people at any stage, and all of those parts have to move, have to work in tandem to get a really, really good recruitment process, and, you know, to make sure that there's a really good candidate experience. So, look, I suppose, will I dive into?
Well, I guess what we could do is, like, you know, basing on the people that are here, you know, we have the hiring manager, recruiter, in case people can't see it, HR team, interview panel, or interviewers, I suppose, senior leadership, and the candidate, because, you know, you're important in this too. You're actually integral to this, to get the job. But I suppose a matter of like linking potentially who could be overseeing certain elements of the process would be good, because I think we could talk all day, I think, if we did, didn't we?
Well, we could, yeah, to be honest with you. It might be, there might be a part 2 to this episode, we'll see.
Comment if you want part 2.
I suppose when I was putting this together, I did have a little bit of a chat with myself as to what was at the centre of things. Was it the job or was it the candidate? And I decided to go with the job, because the whole reason the candidate is there is because a job or a vacancy exists. And the idea that the bullseye, the target, the goal, is to get that job. Okay? So we've already kind of went through what the job is. It's a role within an organisation, performs tasks in exchange for money or a package. There are a lot of other things, you know, that you might want to get out of that job too. Sometimes it's status, sometimes it's, you know, well, I want to say, I have on my CV that I've worked for Google or LinkedIn or jobtalkjava or whatever else it is. Sometimes it's you want to develop yourself and challenge yourself, or you're moving career, whatever else it is. So the hiring manager. So Lorraine, what would you consider the hiring manager to be?
I would say, to me, I think the hiring manager is someone who makes the final judgment of the person who's going to be in the job, you know, based on feedback. Now, they could also be on the interviewer panel, you don't know that, but I mean, like, they're the people who would be influenced by that particular interaction with the candidate directly, and then be on, and, you know, ultimately go, yeah, job.
Yeah, okay. So I would say, look, the hiring manager is the person in charge of the team or the department where the job or the vacancy exists. And what they do is they define what the job requirements are. So if you go back to what we were speaking about a couple of minutes ago about the job design, writing the job spec. They're responsible for putting all of those things together. They might not necessarily be writing the job spec themselves, but often what some organisations do is they will ask outgoing candidates to help them as part of their winds down period or as part of their notice period. Well, would you be able to help me to write the job spec for a candidate coming in, because the job will evolve over time. So you might be hired as a trainer for ABC company 2 years ago, but your role as a trainer for ABC company now is a completely different thing. So the best person sometimes is the person that's doing the job. You have to strike a balance as well with, well, what are my requirements as a hiring manager for my department for this. Sometimes people kind of have this job creep thing where they end up taking on a lot of additional responsibilities. Sometimes that's needed. Sometimes people can gravitate towards, well, I like doing this and I'm going to take this in as part of my role. That can be a good thing. Sometimes that can actually blur or kind of diminish the effectiveness their effectiveness in that role. So it's an opportunity then to kind of, if you haven't already, clear out the lines and kind of demarcate, well, this is actually what the job is. The other stuff is kind of nice to have, but it's not a need to have. Then we've got the recruiter. I would say that that's the person who is responsible, a specialist, responsible for sourcing, attracting, screening candidates. That could be an internal person. And the internal recruiter, will generally be part of the HR team. An external recruiter might be part of an agency as well. So that's that person where you're kind of nearly outsourcing that function, and their job is, they'll do the same thing. They'll do the initial sourcing, attracting, screening and stuff like that, and they will come back to the hiring manager then with a list of viable candidates. Hiring manager, I think, should always have the finger in the pie, because what I would say is, as a hiring manager, keep your eye on what's coming in through the ATS system, because sometimes you might see something, because you're so close to the role and the department, you might see something in a CV or in a candidate that actually might not pop out to the recruiter who isn't a specialist in your area. And sometimes you hear the word talent acquisition specialists, not to be confused with recruiters, although there's a significant overlap. And talent acquisition specialists, just if your company has those, they generally focus on long-term strategic workforce planning, the employer branding, building a talent pipeline, retention. But the recruiter is more concerned with addressing the immediate needs, the here and now. The talent acquisition is more the strategic kind of long-term view. It tends to be more involved, in my experience, with the more senior hires in an organisation as well. So you can see there's links there going back and forth, and there's no reason, again, if you go back to the hiring manager, where the hiring manager can't be involved in any of the other teams or functions that we say. That the hiring manager doesn't only just have to deal with the recruiter, whoever that might be. HR staff then, they'd often manage the overall process. So again, in this age when we talk about candidate experience, somebody that I know went recently to a job interview, and it was for a market leading company, and they walked in and the interview was for 3 o'clock, and the CEO who was interviewing them was running late. CEO came in eating a bag of Tato crisps. They were brought into an office and there's papers everywhere and stuff like that. And the person that I know just kind of came away from it and kind of went, I don't want to work there, because a brutal first impression had been made. So the HR team might kind of be in charge of making sure that they're setting up the room, making sure there's a room booked, it's nice, it's clean, it's going to leave a really, really good impression. Who's going to meet the candidate at the front door and bring them to the interview panel? Is it going to be somebody on the interview panel that does that? Is it going to be an intermediary? Whatever it is. And then they would be responsible for kind of keeping an eye on the ongoing communication. And then obviously the important thing for HR is to ensure compliance with employment laws. And then again, they may have input into negotiating offers and the contracts and making sure everything is legal and above board, and in line with the company policy. Any questions popping out for you on that, Lorraine?
No. It all makes you see, it all makes sense to me. As in, as I was saying, there may not be everyone involved in the process, so you may only be dealing with a recruiter directly and the recruiters then dealing with the hiring manager. That could literally be it, But I think that, when you get to that stage of the interview, that is now more so where the candidate comes in and has a bit more of that want to work. Now, decision making as well, but I mean, like, with regards to success at the interview, I think it's important then that the candidate actually, because you've gotten through that far, that's a good thing.
That's the thing. And as a candidate, say particularly with HR and stuff like that, like, you might not realise that the responsibility for where you are in the recruitment process at any particular time is with a HR department or a person in a HR department, and you may never know that Ger Louie, working in the HR department for ABC company, is now progressing my application. So it's your point of contact will be the recruiter perhaps, or the hiring manager, depending, once that application has gone in. It's not necessarily HR or the IT guy who might be doing their IT magic on whatever HRIS system that the organisation uses. So then, I suppose,
I was just going to say about it doesn't always have to be a candidate applying for a role. It could be someone freelance, and it's a little bit of a different approach with regards to that, but you'd be dealing with somebody in this. Now, you might not be going to a recruiter, for example, because you may want to offer services, so you might need to skip a few steps and go, right, who's in the HR team, who's the hiring manager in this department, do they need external assistance, consultants, whatever it might be. But that process is still the same, wherever you dive in at that time, like the process is still the same, who you engage with is more or less the same. So I think it can apply to anyone, the whole thing.
Absolutely. And then we have the interview panel. Very important people. So obviously I'm not going to spend too long on who the interview panel are, but the interview panel are the group of people involved in interviewing the candidate. And what the interview panel does is they evaluate the candidate's skills, their fit and their potential to add value to a team, and they make decisions. Really important, really, really, really important that they are up to date with the employment law and best practice in general, but particularly pertaining to their own jurisdiction. Many is the interviewer or company that has ended up in the Workplace Relations Commission here in Ireland, for example, because an interview process hasn't been conducted in a compliant way.
Yeah, and again, we did talk about in another previous episode. We have them listed there if people want to go back, but I think it was the one before Christmas, and it was. I'll not go into it, but it was more. We highlighted like the type of questions you ask. So it's very important to ask the right thing and not pry into personal whatever. So as you're saying there about compliance, there's different countries have different legislation, but we're talking more about Ireland when we're talking about compliance.
Yeah, and generally speaking, Ireland would be fairly, best in class in how to do it. To be honest with you, and when we say Ireland, you could definitely talk about European Union countries, and there'd be a lot of similarity with the UK as well. I know we have Brexit and stuff like that, but really our employment laws are broadly similar. Right, senior leadership. You may or may not come across senior leadership in the decision-making process, or it depends on the level that you enter or that you're seeking to apply to. They're usually the high-level executives or decision makers, usually involved for the more senior roles. Now, again, what I do have to say is that in my time in Guinness, especially in the earlier days, the senior leadership got involved with hiring for even the most junior staff. And I thought that was brilliant, because what it did was it showed, number one, they were really, really interested in how we were presenting ourselves to the outside world. They were also mentoring and showcasing desired values that they wanted to see in their interviewing team and that they wanted their interviewers to be looking for. Sometimes with a senior leadership, it might be a final interview a kind of a perhaps a tick in the box exercise in some way, like, you know, that I as a hiring manager in my department, I've made a key, I want to make a key hire, but I know that this person is going to have a lot of interaction with the leadership team, so perhaps, you know, we'll bring them in and we'll have a chat with the you know, the chief executive or a finance director or whoever that might be, and then we have somebody who arguably should be at the center of the process, and the candidate.
Yeah, I think at that stage, the candidate obviously is the start. Like actually, you're sort of you're at the your role, I suppose, as a candidate, or their role as a candidate would be, first off, yes, apply for the job and all that, go through the motions. But at that stage of the process, if you've been offered a job, or if you know, for example, after an interview that it's not really something for you, communicate that. Because the process is, so, as you can see, it takes time and it takes effort from across the board. And I think that if everyone's respectful to each other, you know, if you're expecting certain things from people in that process, then I think you should also give that same respect back with regards to communicating, I don't want that job anymore, it's not for me, maybe it's too busy, it's not what I thought it would be, you know, because that's again the knack of a job description. It says certain things, but then it may not say everything because they want to get a certain talent pool in, and then the interview kind of helps with expanding on that and all of this. But and I think then you know, at the end part, the onboarding and everything. So if the job is definitely not something for you, then save yourself some time and effort as well, and energy of not going through that onboarding process and the training and all of that and things, because it just it's again that mutual respect. But I think, yeah, if throughout the process the candidate themselves, and I think you've seen I know it's been a while since we had the graph up, but the graph had external people on the outside of the circle that the candidate can use to their advantage as well in the process. And they were CV writers, I have them written down, CV writers, career coaches, mentors, and I think it was mentors, and family and friends. And we had a chat about this ourselves anyway, you know, because, you know, you have to. But I think that it's important, if you are going externally, to get help with the process. You know, CV writers help with CVs, sometimes they help with your interviews, career coaches, what type of jobs, all that stuff. I think take what they say with a bit of caution. Do you know, like, don't take it as gospel is what I'll say, because everyone has different opinions. And Ger was mentioning an example, or like we all had this, where, you know, we might get people in and they are at a certain level, but they've been told that they can only have 2 pages, let's say, on a CV. It's all dependent on your experience level and everything, but it doesn't mean that you have to follow certain things. It's not like what people say at that stage, maybe not career coaches, but, you know, like what people say across the board. Just take it as advice and pick and choose advice and what works best for you.
Yeah, it's like, you know, I suppose in your broader life, like, you know, people will offer advice on anything and everything. Treat everything with a bit of skepticism at times, like, you know, but look into the credentials of the people who are giving that advice. In our own field, the CV writers who turn CV around inside 2 hours and all of that kind of business, and you've limited personal contact with them. Are you going to really take advice from that person? I'm just leaving that hanging there, like, you know.
I know. Well, you see, this is it too. It's like the candidate is, yes, everyone in the process is trying to get the best candidate, and a lot of the time, or not a lot of the time, some of the time, you know, you might fall at certain hurdles. And I think it's important, this is kind of going in on a strategy element, and like everything, you should always have action plans. So if this happens, what do I do now? If that happens, what do I do now? You know, because then you'll help yourself through the process without feeling a certain way. And I know I'm saying this from this side, but I have been where, I think all of us have been where everyone else is, you know, and it's kind of like, it's important to reevaluate whether, let's say, for example, a career coach or a career guidance person has told you that you would be best suited for this type of job, right? And you go, yeah, that sounds good. And then you're realizing, actually, no, I'm not. That's not really where my skill set is, or that's not really where I want to go. So reevaluate, okay, maybe now I need to shift my mindset or shift my approaches. Because one thing I think doesn't really help is if you mass apply to jobs. You're just sending your CV constantly to all these jobs, and not all of them will land, and you may only get out of that maybe 2 interviews or something. And getting interviews is good, by the way, it's good experience, but it means that you're now looking at it negatively. You're going, I've sent 100 CVs in and I only got 2 interviews out of that, and out of that I've only gotten 3 responses to say I was unsuccessful or something like that. I think if you put it into perspective, you have to go, well, are these jobs suited to my strategy? Am I, kind of aligning with that? Are these jobs what I want? Because if you go through the whole process, as you see, you'll end up maybe going to the interview and going, actually, I don't want this job. I don't want to work here. And you've now just spent all that energy on something you actually don't want. So I think it's important to breathe. Just breathe and take a step back.
Yeah, and I think, when we were having a little chat about whether or not we were going to do this episode and what it might look like, I think you made a very good point in that we often see advice on LinkedIn to say treat your job search like a job. Well, if you were in a job and you were embarking on a project and you would identify critical stages, you might also be identifying, well, what am I going to do if things go wrong? I'm not going to lose the head. I'm not going to, take it personally and stuff like that. So what are my fallback options? And in that way, and I think that's brilliant advice, because if you start taking things personally and you start kind of taking to the internet and kind of going, I've had this rubbish experience, I've sent out 100 CVs and nobody's getting back to me and stuff like that, it doesn't serve you anything. Nobody ever improved their profile by going and having a rant on LinkedIn about poor experience that they've had in the recruitment process. It might actually disimprove people's perception of you.
Yeah, and it is quite demoralizing as well.
Of course.
And I've been there, and I think this is what I mean by action plans, in that I set up a business. I was like, right, I can't find work because I don't, I knew I didn't want to work certain places and stuff because I just didn't want to go there for the sake of something. Maybe I shot myself in the foot by doing that, but I decided to do something else, give it a go, and, I'm still doing it. And even at that, when you're in your work, you have to, as you said there, you have to strategize, you have to reevaluate, okay, I need to do this. You have to change your strategy, change your approaches, and I have been seeing a lot of posts on LinkedIn about your job search strategy, and it is a job, okay? Like, even if you apply for 2 or 3 jobs that are suited to you, that's much better than applying to 100 jobs. I was going to say 500, but 100 jobs that only 3 of those jobs are suited to you. Because now you're just demoralizing yourself by doing that, and you're looking negatively at the process. But the process is long-winded. Everybody is trying to. I'm very much hopefully everyone's helping everyone and wanting to help everyone, and I think have everyone's best interests at heart. But I think it's important to just and the other thing as well is there are ways to bypass the process. So you can get in, let's say, at certain stages, but through referrals, right? So if you know somebody and they go, oh, send us your CV, make sure you send us your CV. Make sure that CV is actually really good, because if you're being referred, you're already going to get an interview. Like, that's the thing. You're not guaranteed, but more likely going to be asked for if you are actually aligning to the role. You've already bypassed applying to the job. And then also, I think if you're annoyed at recruiters, go directly to the company. A lot of the time they're just advertising the role sometimes they advertise a role through their business, like through their website, or go to their website and inquire through them. If you know you're kind of getting nowhere with it, just put your name in the hat that way. That's just other things I would say.
And you know on LinkedIn, if you go to certain company pages, that you can notify them that you're interested in upcoming roles. Yeah, you can jump in and out of the process in different ways. The thing I'd say about referrals is they're a bit of a minefield, because sometimes you could have somebody as hiring manager in a company, and next of all you've got a senior stakeholder in the business going, oh, I'm going to refer somebody to you, and whatever else. You got to be really, really careful about managing the expectations of that stakeholder. You don't want to kind of just give somebody a job because they were referred by the stakeholder, because they might not have what you need. And ultimately, time out a number, that stakeholder is going to be coming back when they're not seeing the results from your area and kind of go, what's happening? And I'm kind of going, well, do you see who I was put under pressure to hire? And then I suppose the other thing, what I would have said to somebody in that situation very often was, well, look, I'll absolutely prioritise them for an interview, but that's all I'm promising you. Difficult conversation in a lot of businesses, but I think that's you got to be really, really careful with that. The other thing, if you have been referred, pay the person who has referred you the respect of conducting yourself as professionally as any other candidate. Don't make any assumptions that you're going in and getting the job, or that you can submit a substandard CV, or be a bit more casual in an interview or with your communication, just because you happen to be, the finance director's son's best friend or something like that.
I think you've said it all. I was just kind of saying a referral's never a job, it's an interview. I would never put someone in a job, unless the senior person is going to make that decision themselves, I will take that responsibility of this hire. Then if you are then given that responsibility, you can set your own expectations, because I think it's very important. That whole process is all about accountability, and you don't want to get stung with as you said, with someone who you've been referred but aren't performing very well. You know what I mean? So I think just because someone above you has told you something doesn't mean that you should follow it. You know what I mean? It's like everything else. I think we'll leave it at that, Ger, though, will we?
I think we will. I think we've done enough. Our work here is done.
So we'll leave it at that, lads, and feel free to email, send us a message, whatever you want to do if you have any ideas on upcoming episodes. Okay, I'll sign us off and I'll say goodbye. I'll say bye. Goodbye.